President Joe Biden is announcing tariffs on $18 billion in Chinese imports. Included in some of those items that we have are semiconductors, batteries, and those are things that go in most electric vehicles. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell says that she supports the tariffs. In a statement, she says, "We aren't competing on a level playing field. I look forward to continuing to protect American jobs and competitiveness and our economic and national security." So joining us now is Paul Eisenstein, editor-in-chief of Headlight.News. Paul, always great to have you.
Great to be with you.
So we've been talking a lot about electric vehicles and the push to see more of them really across the nation. If we were to see some of these restrictions in place, what kind of impact do you think that could have?
We have seen some within the auto industry, some outside the Chinese industry, say that we are setting up for a potential disaster. The Chinese, we know, get heavily subsidized by the Beijing government, and that's where the big problem comes in. They get subsidies financially, they get subsidies in terms of the access to the critical minerals like lithium, like manganese, like cobalt, that are needed in electric vehicle batteries. And as a result, they're able to drop the price of their vehicles substantially. Yeah, they do have a bit cheaper labor, but that's not the primary reason why you're seeing vehicles like the new BYD Seagull come in. You ready for this? At a starting price of under $10,000 in the Chinese market.
Under $10,000 for an EV?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah, and we're seeing that this is helping the Chinese penetrate markets worldwide. Their numbers are astounding. Now, they're also, in some cases, exporting non-EVs, some regular vehicles and hybrids. They're taking a huge chunk of the market in Europe. They have something like 70% of the EV market in Latin America. And we're seeing the possibility of them taking a big bite here in the North American market. To give you a sense of how much the Chinese have grown. At the beginning of the decade, they exported about 1 million vehicles in a year. Last year, it was up to 5 million worldwide.
all right, so with all of this in mind, what does this mean for the auto industry here in America? You know, obviously we're trying to compete with what they're putting out there, but that sounds like we're nowhere near that level at this point.
No. Now, we've seen some prices start to drop on American EVs, but nothing like this. Chevrolet is looking to bring back the Chevy Bolt sometime in the next year. And we might see that before incentives in the mid $20,000 range. So the gap is absolutely huge compared to what the Chinese would be able to bring a vehicle in here were it not for the new tariffs. There are some concerns. You may recall that back in the 80s, the Japanese faced import restrictions. They voluntarily limited the number of vehicles they would bring in from Japan, though they started building over here. That's one of the reasons they have so many plants in the US, Canada, and Mexico. One of the questions is, will the restrictions that the Biden administration has enacted, the quadrupling to 100% tariff on the Chinese EVs, result in easing things up for the American manufacturers? In other words, could it actually wind up giving them a break so they don't have to worry as much about cutting prices?
Oftentimes, a lot of people don't realize how many goods we are getting imported. If we see these restrictions in place, is that going to have a major impact on the materials that we need to create these vehicles here in this industry?
Well, right now, a good percentage of the raw materials, like some of the ones I mentioned before, lithium, cobalt, manganese, are coming from China, as are whole batteries. We have, however, seen a tremendous shift in the last few years under the Biden administration. You may recall that the Inflation Reduction Act put in place a number of restrictions, mandates for automakers that want to get up to $7,500 in tax incentives for buyers. And as a result, we're seeing a 20-fold increase in the production of EV batteries here in the United States. So on the positive side, some of the restrictions have really helped, and we'll have to see if these new tariffs also wind up moving more production to North America. In fact, BYD, the biggest of the Chinese EV makers, is already talking about putting up a factory in Mexico. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Chinese plant or two here in the United States.
So ultimately, where do you see this going from here? Could you see some kind of standoff or some kind of change to reroute where we're headed now?
That's one of the big worries. Are we going to see some sort of trade war develop between the US and China? Certainly, they are a major export partner. We send a lot of products over there. Could they battle back and basically try to block US exports? There's been talk in Europe, particularly from the French, about putting new tariffs on Chinese vehicles going to that region. And the Chinese have reacted by saying they're going to put limits on, well, what else would the French be exporting but wines and cheeses and the like?
Okay, so there could be quite a bit of trickle down effect. We still have to wait and see. Paul Eisenstein, editor in chief for Headlight.News. Paul, thank you for your insightful conversation tonight.
Great to be with you.